This is Baxter Colburn, host of Verse of the Day. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
The latest headlines.
The Houston Astros, the defending World Series champions, got better adding Garrett Cole.
The insightful interviews.
Rick Saratella, NFL Draft Bible. With how much emphasis is put on the position, yet how many over the last couple of years we've had questions. Why do we put such an emphasis on drafting a quarterback number one overall?
The bottom line is there's not enough good quarterbacks to go around. And I think with the new CBA, it's really a low-risk gamble now. If you look at the playoff teams, the common denominator, good quarterback play.
The hottest takes.
I think the guy to blame is the one guy who hasn't left yet. I think Russell Westbrook is one of the bigger problems in Oklahoma City.
Can all be found on Press Row.
Broadcasting is part of the Public House Media Network.
Here's your host,
It doesn't matter what your name is.
Christian Heimall.
Welcome back on Press Row, everybody, here on this Thursday, October 17th, 2019. Christian Heimall here with you, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network, like we always do. Coming to you however you get your podcast, whether it be Apple or Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com. You can also find us on publichousemedia.org and get yourself some awesome show gear if you head on over to that website and help support the program and help support Public House Media and all the wonderful podcasts that we bring to you. We are in the midst of October baseball. We are in the midst of the NFL season, the Heisman Trophy race. Basketball is starting up. There's a lot going on. I've talked about this before, but October really is one of the best months of the year if you're a sports fan. There's so much going on, and it is a lot of fun. And we're going to get to a bunch of that here for you guys in just a little bit. But today we've tackled some heavy stuff on the show. Last week, obviously, we touched on the China issue and what's going on in the NBA there. And just kind of a follow-up, LeBron James, dude, you got to fire your marketing guy or somebody, your PR guy, because for 2 weeks, you don't say anything. There's nothing to be said. There's a massive meeting with NBA players and with Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, and then you come out and you basically call Daryl Morey uneducated on the subject. And you're supposed to – Daryl Morey, a guy who basically is supporting social justice, supporting human rights in Hong Kong and in China, and you're a guy who has been so heavily involved with social justice here in America, and for you to say he's uneducated or sounded uneducated, that to me is just really, that sounds like you're folding under the corporate pressure about the almighty dollar and the business deals that you have in China. Don't get me wrong. You know, I understand it, and part of what he said in his statement saying that the tweet was ill-timed is correct, I think. Right before the NBA is supposed to go over there and play, Daryl Morey makes that tweet. I don't know if that was done on purpose or not, but it definitely was poor timing. But for LeBron to come out and say Daryl Morey's uneducated on the matter, that's not fair. For Steve Kerr to say that he's uneducated, he himself personally is uneducated, that's not fair, I don't think, either, because Steve Kerr has been one of the most outspoken individuals for social justice in the NBA. So I think a lot of these players are starting to bend to the almighty dollar and all the business dealings that the NBA has in China, and it is very hypocritical of the NBA. And you heard Brandon Robinson, Scoop B Radio, talk about it last week on the show. There is a fine line there between the business side of it and the personal side of it, but I was actually really disappointed in what LeBron James had to say, and he's just proving that, you know, no matter what, when it comes down to the almighty dollar, that's what rules all. And I hate to bring it up, and it's kind of apples to oranges comparison, but this kind of proves the person Colin Kaepernick was. He's willing, and we basically stopped hearing from him. It's more other people advocating for Kaepernick, but he's fine not getting paid and being the martyr for social justice when it comes to a sports celebrity. And LeBron James clearly isn't okay with that, and clearly is not okay with losing potential millions of dollars, billions of dollars potentially, on endorsements and other things of that nature. So a little disappointed to see all that, but we'll see how, if it seems as though this is going to be the end of it. I really hope not, because I again, disappointed in what LeBron had to say. He did try to clarify what his statement was in saying that It was more about the timing of the tweet than it was the subject of the matter. But I'm sorry, you can't come out and say something like that and then try to correct it via tweet because it doesn't look good. It looks like you're backtracking. It looks like you didn't know what exactly you were talking about. But we'll see if anything continues to come of that. Don't forget, you can also be a part of the show as you are here on Press Row every single week. Find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram handles at PressRowPHM. You can email the show, PressRowPHM@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Press Row Podcast by Public House Media. We'll get to your listener questions as we do every single week here on the show, and I'm really excited to answer your questions about it. Wide-ranging questions, some baseball with regards to if the Nationals can really actually win the World Series. I'm not going to answer that as part of the segment, but I will just say this. I think they can because they've got a great pitching staff as proven, in that offense, if Howie Kendrick's going to put up the numbers that he did in the NLCS, it's going to be a really interesting World Series, no matter who they end up playing, whether it be the Yankees or the Astros. But I tell you what, I would love either one of these is going to be a good matchup, but the Astros-Nationals would be a incredibly interesting matchup from a pitching standpoint, especially if the Astros can line it up where Garrett Cole takes on Scherzer and Justin Verlander takes on Strasburg, and then you've got you've got Wade Miley, Patrick Corbin. You've got Zach Greinke going up against Anibal Sanchez. It could be really, really entertaining and really, really fun to watch that in the World Series. So I do think they have a legitimate chance against either of those two teams, but would really be intrigued to see the Astros for that exact reason from a pitching standpoint. But we are going to get to kind of another heavy subject today on the show. It's been kind of swept under the rug a little bit from a national landscape because we're in the midst of October baseball, but the death of Tyler Skaggs, the 27-year-old Los Angeles Angels pitcher, that happened in the middle of the summer when the team was in Texas. It's come out over the recent weeks, the amount of opioids and the amount of alcohol that was in his system at the time of the death. And now there's a former Angels employee who is saying not only did he supply Tyler Skaggs with these opioids, but he took these drugs with him in the past, and now he's basically turning informant for the DEA and saying it's time for everybody to take ownership of what they've done in leading to the death of Tyler Skaggs. Mike DiGiovanna covers the Angels for the LA Times. He's going to join us here in a little bit to talk about this full-on repercussion, what Major League Baseball is going to do, how we got to this point with this young man, and what, if any way, does this hinder how people will remember the Angels pitcher. So little heavy stuff, but again, this is one of those stories that I've followed it for a while. Those of you who listen to the show know I work full-time in baseball, and I've talked to a number of people who know Tyler, knew him, loved him as a person, and I knew a couple people who said he liked to have a good time, he liked to party, and you can take for that what it means, but there may have been some warnings. There may have been some red flags that nobody really kind of acted on. So we're going to talk to Mike DiGiovanna here in just a little bit. We'll get to your listener questions as well. You're on Press Row, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network.
Hi, this is Peggy Rojas, host of Viviendo una Vida en Balance here at Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you can come back and check my show, Viviendo una Vida en Balance, where we talk about life hacks to live a life in balance. And the show's in Spanish. A new show comes out every Monday, so don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and share with your friends. Again, thank you for checking out the following broadcast in Public House Media.
Want to be part of the show? Go to Facebook and search Press Row Podcast Public House Media, or find us on Twitter and Instagram at Press Row PHM. You can also email the program, pressrowphm@gmail.com. This is Press Row with Christian Heimall, a Public House Media podcast.
Welcome back on the Press Row Podcast. Christian Heimall here with you, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network on this Thursday, October 17th, 2019. It was a story we touched on back when it happened over the course of the summer, and listeners of the show know this. Big baseball show here. We talk a lot about it. The untimely passing of Tyler Skaggs, the Los Angeles Angels pitcher, which has now come out about his opioid use and the amount of alcohol that was in his system the night of his death when the team was on the road getting ready to play the Texas Rangers. It's a much deeper story, and we want to talk about it here. And a gentleman who's been really with it from the start, writer of the LA Times, Mike DiGiovanna, joins us now. Mike, appreciate the time.
Hey, no problem.
And if you could kind of get us to this point, because now it's kind of, I don't want to say, at least on the East Coast, it's been kind of non-news, but Rob Manfred saying that there could be up to a $2 million fine for the Angels if they find out that any employee knew about Tyler Skaggs' use, and that there's an Angels employee who's now cooperating with federal agents on this investigation. 6 players were interviewed and questioned over the weekend. Kind of talk to us how we got to this point here with the death of Tyler Skaggs.
Yeah, I think it was Sir Walter Scott who once said, "A tangled web we weave," and that's certainly the case with this story. Yeah, it's a big old mess, to be honest, and it just seems to be spiraling, maybe not out of control for the Angels, but definitely not in a direction they want to go. As far as whatever fines they might face from Major League Baseball will pale in comparison to what they could be liable for in a civil suit from the Skaggs family, a wrongful death suit. And I think, from a criminal standpoint, a lot of the attorneys we have spoken to, and the one who's representing Eric Kay doesn't believe that Eric Kay, the Angels employee you were referring to there, or the Angels will be criminally liable for Tyler's death. But civilly, in a civil suit, they certainly have a lot more exposure here. I think for that, the family just must prove that somebody outside of Tyler was responsible for his death. And in this case, what they'll try to eventually prove is that people in the Angels organization knew of Tyler's drug use. They should have reported it to the commissioner's office. Tyler should have been directed into a drug treatment program, and maybe even in treatment program into the under the joint drug agreement, and that maybe this could have been avoided. So it's about as complicated and as much turmoil as this organization's had on their plate, and they've had quite a bit over the years.
How much of this, obviously Eric Kay has become kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, the star witness here, a former employee who was in the media relations department for 24 years, even said that he supplied and actually participated with Skaggs in the use of these drugs. He's now in a treatment facility, but how much of this is going to fall on what he divulges to federal agents? Is there any chance for players, coaches, any other people in that clubhouse that could be implicated in this?
Yeah, the investigators are talking to players. They'll probably, talk to front office people, team medical staff, trainers, security officials who travel with the team. There's all sorts of people who will be interviewed, whose, phone records, emails, text messages will probably be maybe even subpoenaed if they have to. Depositions will cover a lot of this once the civil proceedings get started. Yeah, there's other people who could be implicated depending on how widespread this drug use was or is in the Angels clubhouse or around baseball. I would venture to say Tyler's probably not the only player who is or was using opiates among how many 800 major leaguers. So it definitely could be a bigger issue that entraps some more people along the way. But certainly, Eric Kay's involvement and his cooperation at this point, the primary purpose for him is to sort of get ahead of what he knew would eventually come out. He knew the text messages that he and Tyler exchanged. He knew of the Venmo transactions that were used to purchase drugs, apparently. He knew he was going to be part of the story, so by cooperating now, if he is charged with a crime, his chances of getting a more lenient sentence are a lot higher by cooperating with the feds right now.
Speaking with Mike DiGiovanna, LA Times writer, and especially considering the drug use that we've seen for opioids across the country, baseball's history with drugs in the 80s, the steroids in the 90s and early 2000s, and then to this, I kind of wonder what kind of, and I'm sure a lot of people wonder, what kind of measures has Major League Baseball taken to try to ensure that their players can't have this kind of thing happen to them?
None so far, to be honest. I mean, they're talking about instituting some kind of testing for opiates, but the problem with that is any kind of drug testing for drugs of abuse will have to be negotiated through the next collective bargaining agreement, or between the union and the owners in some way. And the minor league testing is pretty sound, I think. The guys who are not on 40-man rosters get tested for cocaine, for marijuana, for opiates, and if they test positive, they're suspended immediately, and they start a track in the drugs of abuse program where they'll get help. But in the major leagues, they're not tested. The guys on the 40-man roster are not tested for those things right now. The only way they can be tested is if somebody from the organization comes forward and say, hey, we have reason to believe this player might be using illegal narcotics. That can trigger a test, and then if that player tests positive, he can go into the sort of the rehab track, and he'll get all, if not part, if not all of his salary while he's doing that. So there's a benefit there to the player to undergo treatment, because he'll still get paid. So it's, there are a lot of issues, sort of ancillary issues to this primary one, and what Major League Baseball does in terms of cracking down, if they have to, and testing for opiates is one of them. Certainly, you mentioned all those problems throughout the last few decades. Any ills in baseball reflect those in society as a whole. These baseball players are no different. A lot of them come from tough backgrounds, or maybe grew up in an area or a household or a family where drugs or alcohol were abused. I mean, you can't take 1,000 baseball players and just expect that they're going to be totally different from society as a whole.
100%, and obviously the circumstances around Tyler's death and any death of someone at the age of 27 with the talent that he had is tragic, and we saw the outpouring of support from players, teammates, baseball community in general, across the country and through all levels of baseball. What is the sentiment? What is the feeling around the Angels right now, and maybe the Angels fan base regarding Tyler Skaggs?
It's hard to tell because, I don't know how much stock to put in Twitter and people who actually take the time to write you and express their opinions. And they're kind of all over the map right now. But in hindsight, certainly all the tributes and things to Tyler appear a little bit unseemly right now. And, quite frankly, I was careful in covering the story from the start to try to focus on how the tragedy impacted the Angels, how it affected them moving forward, and just kind of hold off a little bit on some of these, tributes to Tyler, because I just had a strong suspicion that something like this would happen because, like you said, a Major League Baseball player at age of 27 in his prime and apparent, perfect health doesn't just drop dead of natural causes. I mean, I hate to be callous here, but it just, you knew something was up. So we tried to be careful in how we framed that part of the story. Certainly the loss is the loss. And, no matter how he died, I don't think his legacy will be affected for the people who loved him. It's still a terrible tragedy, terrible loss. I really like the kid. He's a really good kid, really good pitcher too. And it's terrible, but, I think it will impact, sort of the casual fan, is probably not going to have as much empathy maybe toward him or the family, knowing the circumstances of how he died.
Well, you kind of bring up an interesting point there, and to kind of circle back to the start of this, you had a hunch that something was going to come down the pipe with regards to the circumstances of his death. I talked to a number of folks in baseball right after his passing, and a couple of whom had spent time with Tyler in the offseason, and their quotes to me were, he liked to have a good time, and that can be, the connotation to that can be whatever you want it to be. So I guess the kind of question, not only with how does Major League Baseball prevent these kind of things, but how is it that something like this was going on potentially for years with a Angels employee and it never came out?
Well, that's something the Skaggs family attorneys, Rusty Hardin, is going to try to get to the bottom of eventually. That's a very good question, and it's going to be at the root of any kind of civil lawsuit against the Angels. I've known Eric Kay for 25 years too, and I was aware of some of the issues he was going through. I was not aware of the extent of them and the seriousness of some of the drugs he was using. Tyler, in terms of guys having a good time, a lot of guys in the major leagues have a good
baseball.
time. A lot of guys smoke marijuana. A lot of guys drink alcohol, especially on team flights. And, with pitchers, they pitch every fifth day. Tyler had pitched that Saturday. The team flew on Sunday. He wasn't scheduled to pitch until Thursday. Yeah, he probably had too much to drink on that plane, apparently. So, but to think he had a serious drug problem. I mean, I haven't been the beat writer since 2015, but I've been around the team a lot and feel like I know this kid pretty well, and I would never have suspected anything like that. I know of plenty of high-functioning alcoholics and addicts, and certainly he must have been one, because when he was healthy, he pitched fairly well. He was not erratic in his behavior, at least in the clubhouse from what I saw. He was always cordial and affable and approachable with us. Always enjoyed talking to him. I'm pretty sure in the 5 years I knew him, he never snapped at me once, and I can certainly not say that about a lot of players in that clubhouse. So he was a joy to be around. And if you didn't know that he had this substance abuse issue, if you didn't have firsthand knowledge of it, I don't think you would have seen it. So that's how these things happen. They can happen in broad daylight because a lot of this stuff doesn't happen out in the open. It happens in hotel rooms. It happens wherever it happens. They don't do it publicly.
Obviously, a tragic story that just continues to kind of develop here in Los Angeles. And Mike DiGiovanna, you can follow him on Twitter at Mike DiGiovanna. We appreciate the time. I appreciate your coverage of this too, and we know it's a rough time there for the Angels and obviously for the Skaggs family entirely. And we just can kind of hope for a resolution at some point to it. Thanks so much for the time. We appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me.
Mike DiGiovanna of the LA Times has covered the Angels for quite some time. I mentioned hadn't been the beat writer in 5 years, but he has been around and covering the Angels for more than 20 years for the LA Times. And again, it's a tragic story. It's a sad story, but it's one that we just hope. He brought up an interesting point. Baseball with the drug issues that it has had over the last 30 plus years kind of reflects that of our society. And the opioid crisis in America, it does not discriminate. And it's something that clearly doesn't matter who, it can affect anybody. So all we hope for is peace for the Tyler Skaggs family and for the Angels in this situation. You hope that those who knew are held accountable, and you hope that Major League Baseball really does something to kind of change this. I mean, the fact that they don't have a drug policy program for this is a little ridiculous. It goes to show you that at the major league level, it is about the dollar. It is not about the safety or the development of these players. We see it in the NFL too with their marijuana, and how many players this season have said things about using marijuana as a pain medication and using painkillers after games because they don't want to lose that opportunity and they don't want to lose that dollar amount. And minor league baseball has a great drug testing program. It's worked for years now. The fact that it hasn't been implemented into Major League Baseball shows that the players at that level don't want to lose out on their money by potentially having to get hurt or deal with pain and not be able to perform at the level that they're expected to. So it's a vicious cycle, and unfortunately, a young man, 27 years old, with great talent and a great family, and by all accounts, a great kid, as you just heard from Mike. Unfortunately, had to lose his life for us to really kind of talk and figure out how to make this thing better. We appreciate Mike's time. We appreciate your time as well and your listener questions. We're going to answer those when we come back. You're on Press Row, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network.
Listen to every episode and get the latest shows sent right to you. Subscribe to Press Row on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, and Stitcher.com. Or visit us online at www.thephmedia.com.
This is Jenna Burt, host of the Confessions of a Military Spouse podcast here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Confessions of a Military Spouse, where we dig deep and talk about the unspoken hard truths of what it's really like to be a military spouse. A new show comes out bi-weekly. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Confessions of a Military Spouse. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Press Row with Christian Heimall, a Public House Media podcast.
Welcome back on Press Row. Christian Heimall here with you. Big thanks to Mike DiGiovanna there for joining us. And again, like I said, it's kind of a shame that Major League Baseball has done nothing about this, and it seems really because a lot of these guys are concerned about potentially losing out on millions of dollars because they wouldn't be able to, or they'd get busted for it and get suspended for it, or whatever it is, maybe even kicked out of the league. Who knows? So, but incredibly disappointing, and hopefully hopefully something changes here. And it just sucks that like with everything, we have to have a tragedy happen before action gets taken. So, but we'll see how it all goes from there. So, as always, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at PressRowPHM. You can email the show, PressRowPHM@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Press Row Podcast by Public House Media. Get to some of your listener questions as we do every single week. Jimmy in Maryland asking who got the better, or did the Los Angeles Rams make the best moves over the last couple of days trade-wise, and what does it say about where they are? Well, it's interesting. So we'll just go literally the last 3 days. So on Tuesday, they trade Marcus Peters, one of their best young cornerbacks, made the Pro Bowl in 2015 and 2016, traded him to Baltimore for a linebacker and a fifth-round pick next year. Peters in the final year of his rookie contract before he'll go to arbitration and potentially make a decent amount of money. And then the very next day on Wednesday, they trade a couple of draft picks, first-round picks in 20 and 21, and then a fourth-round pick in 2021. For Jalen Ramsey. This is after Aqib Talib goes on the injured list. I don't really know why they traded Marcus Peters, especially because of Talib going on the injured list. Now, you get a incredibly talented defensive back in Jalen Ramsey, someone who did not want to be in Jacksonville anymore, and maybe he'll play tremendously, and he'll be a great opportunity for this team to really kind of do stuff. But I think, honestly, maybe the Ravens make out best here because what it shows is, number one, Marcus Peters, who's dropped off over the last couple of years, since his Pro Bowl season in 2016, but the Ravens are starting to shore up that defense and try to make a legitimate run here in the AFC. There's nobody that's really showing up as a strong contender to the Patriots. The Chiefs haven't really done it. The Bills, you can't imagine, are going to stick around. The Texans, if they ever get healthy, who knows? But it's going to be interesting to see how things work in the AFC. And the Ravens are basically saying, let's give this a shot and see what we can do and try to improve via trades. Meanwhile, with the Rams here, you got Jalen Ramsey for maybe a year and a half before you're going to have to spend a lot of money on him when you've already got money tied up in Jared Goff, in Todd Gurley, in Aaron Donald, and in Ndamukong Suh. There's a lot there for this Rams team already spent. So you're almost kind of saying, we've got to win this in the next 2 seasons, either this year or next year. We have to win it because of all the money that we've already spent. We're not going to be able to get a talent like Jalen Ramsey in free agency, so let's try to go get him via the trade. We'll see how it all ends up going, but I do think the Ravens actually make out better with this one, to be 100% honest. All right, Brandon asking here, is Jalen Hurts the front runner for the Heisman Trophy? He is. He's clearly the front runner. However, the other two guys behind him are making this kind of interesting here. Depending on who you talk to, Jalen Hurts is the front runner, the quarterback at Oklahoma. USA Today, they do a poll with 21 different voters who are all voting on the Heisman. They just work for USA in different facets. But Hurts has 10 of those first-place votes. And you look at what he's done over the year, he's been pretty impressive. 17 passing touchdowns, 1,758 passing yards, 630 on the ground, 8 rushing touchdowns as well. Had a good game against Texas in the Red River Showdown. Did have a couple turnovers, but he is still maybe the more complete player so far. You look at the other two guys that are kind of creeping in there, maybe Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama, see what he's able to do potentially, especially in the SEC. He's always going to get a bump up because it's the SEC, because Alabama's blowing people out. He had another great weekend against Texas A&M. He's got over 2,000 passing yards, 27 passing touchdowns. He's completing more than 73% of his passes, so he's certainly up there. And will be as long as Alabama continues to cruise. The other guy out of the SEC, Joe Burrow, the quarterback at LSU, is playing really, really well against Florida this past week. He was 21 for 24, 293 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and they absolutely smoked Florida 42-28 over the weekend. Not to mention the fact that this dude is completing almost 80% of his passes and has 25 touchdowns for the year. So he's really impressive. Joe Burrow is going to be kind of a dark horse all season because Jalen Hurts has already been really, really talented in his career. So is Tua. I don't see anybody really challenging those three. It's kind of a quarterback-only award now, even though I think Jonathan Taylor, the running back at Wisconsin, might be the best draft-ready guy in college football right now. But we'll see. It's always been generally a quarterback award, save I think it was 2015, I think, when it was Mark Ingram who ended up winning it. But yeah, it's interesting to watch, and I do think Jalen is currently the front runner here. So we'll see how that all actually pans out coming down the pike here in just a little bit. Last question here. Which of these NFL quarterbacks is more likely to get their job back once they return? Cam Newton for the Carolina Panthers or Drew Brees for the New Orleans Saints? Look, this is probably the weirdest part about the NFL and about this is the fact that you look at these two teams, and when their quarterbacks went down, everybody was kind of scared. Everybody was a little concerned. But in the NFC South, the New Orleans Saints, they've won 4 in a row without Drew Brees behind Teddy Bridgewater. Carolina Panthers have won 4 in a row after losing 2 in a row with Cam Newton and now with Kyle Allen there. I think the one who's more likely to get their job back is Cam Newton, simply because, and that's not to say that Drew Brees doesn't deserve his job back. Drew Brees, in my opinion, is the second greatest quarterback of all time behind Tom Brady. When all is said and done, I think Drew Brees will go down as the second greatest quarterback of all time. Numbers will show it. Championships may not, but he will be, in my opinion, the second best. The reason I say Cam Newton, though, is because Cam Newton is younger than Drew Brees. You look at Cam Newton and you look at where these guys are in their careers. Drew is up there. Drew, we don't know how much longer he's going to be able to be around. Drew at 40 years old. Meanwhile, Cam is sitting there at just 30, 10 years his younger. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Maybe, who knows, that being said, Cam is also probably better trade bait right now because Kyle Allen is being pretty professional and pretty damn good for this Carolina Panthers team. Teddy Bridgewater, he might be the future as well for this Saints team. I think that's one of the other reasons you have to really kind of look at it as to why he might actually be able to go and keep this starting job with Teddy Bridgewater, because I think Drew Brees even realizes that the future for the New Orleans Saints is Teddy Bridgewater. But we'll see. That's one of the other reasons why I think that Cam is more likely to get his job back than Drew. I think both of them end up getting their job back at some point. Carolina's going to have to probably lose a couple of games for Cam to really get in there. The Saints are really going to have to lose because in that division, you want to try to put as much distance as you can between your next best team, and Carolina right now is that next best team. So we'll see what happens. But if I had to put money down, I say it's Cam Newton simply because I think the Saints are a lot closer to finding their heir apparent than the Panthers are in trying to move on from Cam Newton. But I don't think either one should lose their starting job, but we'll see. Big thanks to everybody for being a part of the show. As always, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at PressRowPHM. You can email the show, PressRowPHM@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Press Row Podcast by Public House Media. You can find me on Twitter as well, at Chris Heimall, ChrisHeimall. Huge thank you to Mike DiGiovanna of the LA Times for joining us to talk about Tyler Skaggs. again, just a very sad situation, but hopefully some things come to fruition and some changes get made in Major League Baseball. You can follow Mike for continuous updates on that at Mike DiGiovanna on Twitter as well. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, share us with your friends and family. We're on Apple and Google Play, Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, iHeartRadio, and of course on publichousemedia.org. Really appreciate your guys' support of the show. Head on over to publichousemedia.org to get some awesome show gear. And until next week, I'll see you on Press Row.